Strata Unscripted is back, and this time with special guests, Kate and Jodi. Kate, can I have you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Thomas. My name's Kate Yeowart. I'm, I'm the Strata manager in Victoria, Australia. I've been a manager for 23 years and a Strata trainer for 18 of those. In my newest venture, I am taking training to the next level, where I am offering training directly to committee members, lot owners, as well as to Strata managers.
Fantastic. And Jodi, how about you?
Hi, I'm Jodi. I'm the founder of Strata Stories Australia. I am not a Strata manager and I have never been a Strata manager. So, Strata Stories Australia is an education channel for owners, run by owners. So, I focus on the owner experience, the human side of Strata. So, I look at Strata through the owner's lens, how the system works, how it's failing us, and how it needs to evolve to better support the people living inside it.
Well, it's 2v2 because Katharine is also a Strata manager.
Yeah, but also approaching it always from the human side, honestly. So, yeah, I got both your backs here. We're good.
Excellent. Yes, and I'm badly outnumbered, so that's probably all I'm going to say today. But Katharine, connecting Canada and Australia, take it away.
Yeah, the evolution of the episode today came because we were having a conversation about Jodi and I were having a conversation, about the differences between Australia and British Columbia Strata, how our governance systems work. And then I had reached out with Kate and we were talking, and then I just realized when we talk about the stories, like Thomas, your stories and others that I've heard from colleagues about Ontario's structure, how they govern their strata, how they approach regulation and education, and then how Jodi was talking about it, how Kate was talking about it, we started to see strata not as just a place in terms of the space and location, but it's almost like a strata as a time in history too. So it was interesting as I talked to each of you to kind of figure out the patterns in how things work in the industry and in the owner and strata manager experiences, how the regulation works. It's interesting trying to place BC in where it would be in the timeline of strata evolution. And I'd like to kind of talk it out before I say where I kind of see where we are. But yeah, Thomas, why don't you just before we dig into Australia, just tell us a little bit of a couple of the main differences maybe between Ontario and BC, just as a refresh. We talk about BC a lot, so I don't want to dig into it quite yet.
We do, and BC is the only province in Canada, and indeed jurisdiction in North America, that calls strata. So we are with you, Australia, on that. Everyone else, it's condominium corporations, condominium associations, or HOAs. And the main differences between Ontario and BC are our approach to education. Ontario, it's mandatory. BC, it's entirely self-directed. And reserve funding, where in Ontario they must be fully funded based on their latest reserve report. In BC, there's a contribution amount that's linked to your operating budget. And there's a lot of special levies in BC, special assessments, what they would call them in Ontario, to fund those capital projects.
And then there's obviously, again, some differences there in how those expenditures can be made. In Ontario, the council, their board of directors, has more autonomy over that, whereas in BC, they do have to go back to the ownership for 3/4 votes for any sort of levies or a lot of the major spending. They have to get at least a majority vote for any major spending, basically. I'd be curious, just because I know the same thing in Australia. It's not Australia strata, it's very much state by state, or state, right? Not province.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Sorry. Yeah. So Kate, maybe just starting with you, give it like what is the regulation structure look like in
Australia? Well, I can speak most particularly about Victoria. I've worked in other states, but particularly across the eastern seaboard, but Victoria is my main domain. So in Victoria, we have the dual funding, as you were saying. We have your admin fund and your maintenance fund. The maintenance fund is underpinned by a long-term maintenance plan, typically prepared by either an engineer or a quantity surveyor. So trying to look ahead into the future to see how much money you need to have expended. But once it's written into that maintenance plan, the committee or the council has the right to determine expenditure. The only time they need to go back to the main ownership group for a 75% special resolution is when they are looking to spend something extraordinary outside the long-term maintenance plan and an expense that's twice the annual budget. So they've got a lot of power and authority, that committee. In fact, they have all the power in Victoria. They have all the power of a general resolution. So as long as something is only required to be a general resolution and is not mandated to be decided at an AGM, that committee has that authority. The long-term maintenance plan, to talk a little bit about that, we have to have a plan that runs for no less than 10 years. So typically every 5 years we have a 15-year plan prepared. And sometimes for buildings with larger capital items, we will ask the surveyor to look ahead for another 5 years just to make sure there isn't a major expense coming. A really good plan will start costing those major capital items even before they start appearing on the plan. We'll still have a line item of savings for it.
Where do you find like day-to-day specifically? Like, so Victoria, that's Melbourne is your major city. And specifically, if for those of you listening from BC and you don't know which states kind of house the major cities, so that's going to be your biggest city there. That's where Strata Savvy is based out of. What are some of the major bottlenecks you see day to day in just managing of properties, and where there's friction within the framework of that governance process, would you say?
One of the biggest bottlenecks I find is we've got 5 tiers of strata buildings. There's tier 1 and tier 2 must have a long-term maintenance plan, but tiers 3 and 4, it's optional. And what I find, particularly for brand new buildings, we get a lot of people who are looking at the retirement end of life. So they're very funds conscious and they don't want to fund a long-term maintenance plan. They want to keep their costs as minimal as possible. So I find myself politely arguing with these people and explaining that you actually can't do that, that whilst it's optional, it's duplicitous to not fund a long-term maintenance plan. If you know you're only going to be here for 5 or 10 years and you can exit before the upgrade of the lift is required, why should you not have been contributing to that expense? So I find that that's a really big touch point. Then a conflict point. But another one is also insurance excesses, because particularly with a lot of waterproof membranes, I don't know if you have that so much here, but our waterproof membranes are terrible. Or typically,
like, what application are you talking? Like building exterior, like building envelope membranes kind of thing, or patios, or roof, or just in general everywhere?
Patios. You know,
patios,
so
a lot of patios,
balconies or ground floor gardens, etc. So waterproof membranes typically were done by getting a bucket of powder, mixing some water in it, having the apprentice apply it. And if the day was too hot, too cold, too wet, if there was any compromise on that membrane, if the tile structure over it shifted, etc., you had a compromise on the membrane. If you had a puddle flange on your balcony and water got in underneath the membrane, etc., etc. So what I find is we have a lot of water leak issues in our buildings. So insurers have naturally responded with higher premiums and higher excesses to keep the premium lower. And
where's your average deductibles right now, would you say, for, say, water escape?
Oh, I say probably between $3,000 and $5,000 per claim.
Okay. I'm thinking about like, so the way our insurance is structured. So like right now, our deductibles for a water escape claim or multi-unit water escape claim, we're talking like $100,000 right now.
It's come down a bit, but 30 to 40,000 is kind of a good average right now. They used to be about
in the last 5 years. Yeah.
Now
it got crazy.
Back.
Yeah. That is next level from here. I've known a couple of buildings to have that. The only building in recent years that I've managed that had $100,000 deductible was for fire, where we had a tobacconist in there. And I don't know if you've heard, there's an awful lot of fire bombings of tobacconist shops in Melbourne. Yeah, so you don't want a tobacconist in your building because your insurance will go up by about 5-fold, and yes, your deductible for fire will be $100,000.
So we've gone through trends of that in BC. Like, so it was when it was cannabis was still really commonly used, but not yet decriminalized and not legalized. So those shops, which were literally everywhere, though, created problems for exclusions on insurance for the strata corporations that housed those commercial units. And it would be a fight with the landlord and the strata and the city. And they'd all eventually fine until that would exceed their profit, then they'd shut down, or until the local law enforcement shut down. And now we're seeing the same thing, but with shrooms dispensaries. So now stratas are struggling with their insurance, excluding them for that. Yeah, fascinating. Weird trends for different things in different cities at different times.
We just didn't know that we're all going through the same journey. But
well, when I mean, some of the things you said, I want to give Jodi a chance to give us an overview too before we dig into some of the themes, because some of the things you're saying, I mean, I have to stop myself from laughing because it's literally conversations of frustrations that I've had over and over with Thomas. So it's so funny. But yeah, why don't we swing over to you, Jodi? So you're in New South Wales, and primarily you're in Sydney specifically, but you guys, all that state also houses Canberra, and
Canberra is its
own thing.
Territory.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What other major cities are in that region, just for frame of reference for those who don't know?
I mean, I guess the greater Sydney area obviously goes everywhere from Sydney CBD all the way out to Penrith, but yeah, so New South Wales itself, you've got right up and down the coast all the way out. So we do have, some major hubs of strata, so of that dense housing density, apartments. So, we do have our CBD, we then go out Parramatta, we then go out Penrith, obviously the Illawarra down the coast, then you've got Newcastle up the coast. So we have those big pockets of housing density that is obviously larger strata living community areas. So I think in line with what Kate said, yes, New South Wales operates in the same financial structure. So we have an administration fund and we have a capital works fund is what we call it here. And yes, we do the same. We call it a capital works plan document put together that obviously outlines, a estimate of what the, costs for capital works maintenance should be over the next 10 years. But that is really just a guide, because as Kate said here, owners get to choose what they spend money on and what they don't. So different to what Kate has said, here in New South Wales, we actually vote at an AGM the amount of money that the committee can spend without having to get owners' vote. So obviously that varies, depending how much influence the committee probably has at an AGM, depends how large that number is that gets approved. So it always comes down to, is this above that threshold? Do we have to go to a general meeting to get this voted by the owners corporation? But as Kate said, you can have the plan and you can have a committee that wants to abide by that capital works plan. But at the end of the day, owners it's not they don't want to spend money. I don't believe that that's true. If they understood the impact of not spending the money, I truly believe they would. But at the end of the day, you are asking unqualified, unknowledgeable people to make a decision on should they spend money on something they can't understand the impact of not spending it on. We're human. Strata is human. It's driven by human beings. And sometimes those human beings want to pay their other bills and they don't. And if they have to rob Strata a little bit to pay their electricity bill, that's exactly what they're going to do, because they know that if they don't pay their electricity bill, the electricity will get cut off, but they don't know that if they don't save enough money for the elevator replacement in 25 years, they're going to get a massive special levy. So humans make human decisions based on what they comprehend the outcome of that decision to be. So,
yeah, it's a big problem here. Before Katharine jumps in with a question, I'm just going to say that our studies typically are more than 10 to 15 years. They're 25 or 30 years, depending on where you are in North America. So they capture longer life issues, and that helps to get a sense of what's going to be required when.
It can be wildly
but
inaccurate,
the tendency
though, to be honest.
people to minimize their contributions,
100% that
is
they
a
are
problem.
wildly inaccurate, but and
But
I think
30 years, how can they possibly not be wildly
and that's right. They
I really, it resonated with me when you described how you do every 5 years, but it only is for like the next 15, maybe 20. Like that to me feels reasonable. My question was just listening to what you were saying, Jodi, and especially from the owner experiences. I've had that comment said to me so many times. Oh, well, Strata gal, it's just that education doesn't matter. It's just because my council and my Strata specifically just has some specifically bad people, and that's the problem. And it just makes me laugh because I'm like, that's always the problem then. If that's the case, we're all just bad people in every bad strata then, because you all say the same thing. So with that in mind, like, what does the education for owners look like in your state? And if you could like wave a magic wand, what would you want for them instead? Or is it
yeah, so I think from my experience to date, there really isn't education. There is a lot of so there's a lot of information out there. So if you Google something, you're going to find a lot of articles. They're not very helpful. They're very information heavy, and if you don't understand enough about strata, it's just words on a page. So there is a lot of information. There is not a lot of education, and I believe they're two different things. So education, the outcome of education is supposed to be comprehension. The outcome of information is being able to say you have that information. So here, there's a lot of information available. There is obviously each strata management company can run their own personal education nights and all those sorts of things, and they do happen. But again, you're being educated by the people who sometimes you might not feel have your best interest at heart. So I don't think it always lands really well.
It's true. They don't all have a director of education. Who cares?
You know what I mean? And I think that the biggest thing is, yes, we now have mandatory committee training coming in. It's not here yet. As an owner, all I know is it's coming. I keep hearing about it on social media, but that's about it.
Who's developing it?
The government is supposed to be
but no idea the partnerships or who's the stakeholders involved.
The government's working with a couple of bodies, like I think SCA, New South Wales, they're working with, and there's a couple of private bodies that they're working with, but they're not making clear what the training's meant to cover, and or even sort of what's the structure around.
Yeah, and I think my concern over this education for New South Wales is that if it is just more information, if it's an information dump, you're going to sit there and watch slideshows on screen, and at the end of the day, that sort of information is probably already available if you wanted to learn. So it's one of those things that it's going to have to be in a format that really helps drive understanding and comprehension. But I also am skeptical on the full impact because, again, strata is human. So at the end of the day, if you don't want to do the best thing by your owner's corporation as a committee member, all the training in the world won't change that, right? So that's human behavior. That's not knowledge and understanding. And at the end of the day, everyone has a different level of education and comprehension ability and capability to understand. So if we're giving generalized blanket education to every single committee member, it's going to land with some people and it's not going to land with others. And I see that across the committees that I serve on. There are a large variety of people and educational background and language, barriers and all those things. So I'm interested to see what it will look like, but my concern is that it's just going to be more general information and it's not really going to move the needle for us owners.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right there, Jodi, but unfortunately, governments can't, there's no magic wand to wave.
No.
But
And you've got to start somewhere.
I think it would be nice if there was a little more collaboration sometimes. I feel like, especially in BC, what I see is a system that is incredibly fragmented and siloed, and everyone is very protective of their little slice of the industry. And to me, just looking higher level, it's really short-sighted because it allows us never to build past the boundaries of those fences we're putting up. And if we took them all down, we could build something pretty spectacular together. There's a lot of really incredible strengths. And I remind myself all the time that it's not ever one person that has all the good ideas, right? Like, I know I have things to contribute, but others do too. And I like to let myself imagine what could be. But for the time being, what actually was released this week in BC was through one of our major associations in the province in partnership with BC Housing and the provincial government, was an optional set of online webinars. And it's very much similar to what I think you're envisioning New South Wales is going to be, Jodi, and to what we see in Ontario. And it's an online click-through webinar legislation PowerPoint-based program. So
yeah, what I've seen so far are videos, and they're kind of AI overwritten and very legalistic and
synthetic sounding voice. Not going to speculate on that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So basically, it's going to be like company onboarding processes. You sit there and you just.
So like at every major corporation I've been at, where the trainee clicks through while they're watching.
That's my fear. That's exactly what we're getting.
That's going to happen.
Well, that's brilliant news. This is brilliant news for me, because that's why I've started my business. Because Jodi, I agree with you that Strata is about people, but it is also about buildings. And the people need to understand that the built environment needs to be managed and maintained, as well as the community within. And the training programs that I'm writing will have an online component, but it'll be me, not an AI avatar. And then it'll be augmented by, there'll be live sessions that people can attend. And there'll be Q&A, and people can subscribe to my service where they can reach out and get answers to really curly questions. And I'm not just training managers, but I'm training people who live within the Strata community, because I agree with you, you need to bring that together. I work with a cohort of managers, because I've been in the industry so long. We all, you tend to rise to the same level, the people who are like-minded. Yes. So I've got a number of like-minded managers who agree with you, Jodi, that we need to care not just for the built environment, but for the people within it. And these are managers who are going, they want to back my business and they're really happy to send their committees and their members along to training with me. So, I don't think the industry, I can't speak for New South Wales, but I can speak in Victoria. I think there's a cohort of really good managers who want to see change. They're just busy earning a living and don't have the skill set that I have. I've been very blessed, for 18 years to be able to train people. And the people who've come and done my courses have said, I've learned more in one day with you, Kate, than I did in the whole Cert 4 that they have to do.
When we were having our call a while back, Kate, I couldn't help but think how much you're so much the Australian version of what I'm doing here in BC. And we got so excited talking about educational concepts, because exactly what you're trying to create in Australia is what I'm trying to create here in BC. And that was also my thought too, when I was watching what's unfolding here in BC, is I thought, well, great, that's fine. I'm still going to have business, because that's nothing to do with how I do my training. So fine.
Yeah, great. So
we've talked about SCA a couple times. Just putting a little bit of a pin in kind of the education stuff, I'd love to talk about how, because SCA is massive. This is a national organization that has like state branches, and it is the major association for the strata industry in Australia. And there's been some tumultuous years of transition and growth over the last like 5 to 7 years. And I'd love to hear your perspective on what it was like to see on the inside from each of your perspectives of this evolution of this major association.
I'll step back for you, Jodi, on this one.
Okay, so I mean that says a lot, doesn't it? Now, so look, I'm going to be fully upfront. Again, I'm not a strata manager. I'm a strata owner. So you know, my experience of the SCA is very much on the outside. Yes, I was employed by the strata industry for a period of time, so I have attended some of the SCA events, etc. But I haven't used the SCA in the way that a strata manager would utilize the SCA. What I would say is the SCA is an industry association. It's not an owner advocacy body. So I know on their website, I know they do claim that they're there to support owners as well as managers and suppliers and things like that. However, that's not necessarily how it's experienced as an owner. So their revenue model is industry funded. So naturally, they protect the interest to sustain. And as a business owner, I understand that. It doesn't put my nose out of joint too much because I understand that's the way it is. But commonly, owners feel SCA isn't fully unbiased. You know, they take sponsorship, they have shifting reform positions, you know, depending on pressures from their members who pay membership, but that's business, you know. I do believe that SCA is having an impact on legislation reform. However, that impact and that support is very much to benefit the strata management industry, you know. So yes, there is bias in that, but they're the people that they're representing. So from an owner's perspective, I can see they are being effective. I'm not always happy with what they're pushing for, but they definitely are actively trying to facilitate that reform push. Yes,
definitely. I see. Look, SCA, I think has lost its way a little bit. In that, you're right, Jodi. It's very much an industry body, but it's I think it's a little bit too governed by certain sectors of the industry body, particularly franchise models. And that's where we see, there's this big push for minimal management fees, but lots and lots of additional fees. And that comes from the franchise model, because when you're a franchise owner, you pay your commission to the franchisor on the basis of your management fees. So you want to minimise that, to minimise what you pay out. And you want to maximise your earnings in other ways. I don't agree with that. I do still manage a few properties as favours for our past clients, and also to keep my hand in. And my business model is very, very clear. I have an all-in fee. I don't charge insurance commissions. This is the management fee. I don't charge disbursements, etc., etc. This is your management fee. And if I need to charge anything extra where I've had to do something really extraordinary to fix up mistakes of past managers, I'll negotiate that with the committee. I say, you can do this, or I can do it for you, and here's the fee. And they will say yes, or they'll say no. So everybody knows what they pay me. And that's something that I think SCA has not championed. And I think that's where they've missed the boat. I also would like to see SCA becoming properly a body that represents not just business owners, but lot owners. Or maybe we need to start a separate association for lot owners where they can get together and talk. But that said, those lot owners need to come to the conversation with a measure of education, because we can't continue to see this dichotomy of the big bad strata manager versus the poor little lot owner, because the big bad strata manager is just trying to manage the community and its requirements under the law, reflecting the needs of the community. They've got to work together.
Yeah.
There's no room for this,
Great.
you know.
We've had a user comment here about BC strata size.
Yeah, I love that. I
think it's
love that
BC.
comment
We have a
because
very large.
I gotta say,
Yes.
I'm gonna debunk this right now. Sure, at least half or more of the 34,000 strata units or strata corporations in BC are like fourplexes or less, so they're quite small. However, from the mouths of the CMHC and all the regulators and the insurance company and Van City, the little guys take just as much work as the big guys, so we don't really want to deal with you. That is my sentiment on that comment. But I would love to hear from the Victoria model. What is the split when you talked about tiers earlier and different sizes? Is there some of that sentiment that comes through as well, where you're like the smaller stratas have a tendency to believe that the rules don't apply to them, or that they have special granted exemptions, or are there actually exemptions under the law? Because in BC, there's not actually a lot of wiggle room.
No, there's no exemptions, but there's different, other than for a long-term maintenance plan, but otherwise they're under the same rules. But smaller strata properties say, oh, well, you know, we don't need anything. You know, I had somebody ring me yesterday and say, oh, you know, we're just 5 lots. You know, what do we need? You know, we don't really need anything. And I thought, you probably have no idea of the politics that run through your strata community. And these properties tend to be the ones that, you know, have a lot of touch points for a small management fee. And they can be
concentrate the feelings too. There's deeper blood in smaller stratas. You water it out when you get a bigger one.
Exactly, because people relax their expectations in a bigger one. They understand there's a lot of personalities and a lot of different perspectives. But in the smaller ones, that they want to rule the roost. You know, they see it more as my domain. So I find that they are actually quite deeply problematic. And yes, similar to your experience, about 80% of all strata buildings in Victoria are those small buildings. And there's the mindset of, you know, do you have a lot of littles and you can make, you know, a good income out of a lot of littles, or do you go for the bigger ones? Because the bigger ones do come with more complexity, more politics, you know, more scrutiny of what your work is, etc. But, you know, I think there's room for both. But I think there needs to be education at both levels.
I think the littles don't realize that there's still a base level of work administratively, financially, but also there's a base level of liability and risk that you take on.
100%.
That's what also you're paying for, you know, same as snow removal. The prices aren't just for the actual salt, it's for the snow removal liability insurance a lot of the time, because those operators are paying $150,000 a season for that coverage. If they're doing it properly, to be clear.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah. But sorry, Jodi, I'd love to also hear your perspective on this as well, the multiplex and the division, and if there's any differences in how they're operated.
So, I mean, legislatively, no, there isn't. I know here in New South Wales, there was a period of time that a duplex, so just 2 properties together, I don't know if that's what you call it over there, but a duplex here. Yeah. For a while, they were being strata titled. I think that's been changed now. They don't have to be strated, because obviously, you know, it was additional costs just for 2 neighbours to have a joined wall, etc. So I think, you know, that caused some problems, I think, because the fee to manage a 2-lot property was reasonably high, because there was, as you said, there's still a lot of administration, there's still a lot of things to be done. And of course, these 2 owners are going, well, this is ridiculous. Like, there's only 2 of us. Like, we could just make these decisions together and things like that. So, you know, that sort of thing did happen and reverted back. But I think I'm not a strata manager, but I've sat next to them, you know, in the strata management companies for years, you know, so I've heard all of the distress and the problems that come up, you know, and exactly what you said. A 4-lot townhouse scheme can be more problematic for a manager than a 140 lot apartment building sometimes, you know, because
And
again, I say
way less for that
that's
40
it.
units.
And again, like for me, like strata is human. So at the end of the day, if you've got 140 people who manage to get along and make reasonable decisions together and follow processes and all that, and yet you have this 4-lot townhouse and one person in that complex is just being very problematic, and you know, there's a lot of owner, you know, disharmony, and you know, it might only be 4 people, but they can make a lot of work, you know, because at the end of the day, human behavior, and this is what people don't understand. Strata management, yes, it is governance, and I 100% back that. There's legislation, the strata management, you know, it's governance, administration, all those things, but so much of it is people management. It is human behavior, you know, like I say to people all the time, owners have human reactions to things. We don't have corporate reactions. You know, we have human reactions because it's our home or it's our investment. It's where we've put, you know, a large chunk of our money, right? So we have human personal reactions to things, which means that a strata manager has to actually know how to communicate and how to de-escalate and all of those relationship skills that are based around people management. You know, it's, yes, they are managing a building, but they're managing a owner's corporation, and that could be 100 people. And I don't know if you've seen a kindergarten, you know, classroom at any point. That's only 30 people, and kindergarten teachers struggle. Can you imagine having 100 and something people in a classroom and trying to get them all to learn at the same pace and make the same, you know what I mean? Like strata management is human people management.
It is. And it's such a base human need and a dignity, like an essential thing we need. A home, a place to belong, to feel safe in. So when there's extreme conflict, instability, inconsistency in a strata corporation, owners corporation, body corporate, it makes the owners feel insecure in what should be the most secure place that they have in their life. And it's an ugly world out there sometimes. We need to remember, as those of us who are participating in this whole industry of strata, that this is not just profits and finances and machines. This is human dignity, and we need to remind ourselves that in those really hard moments. And
Katharine,
also, sorry.
I just want to jump in there. And just speak to an experience that I had. I was invited to run the AGM for a really big building in Melbourne that actually self-managed. The committee managed it. They employed an accountant full-time to do all their back-of-house financial stuff. They had a consultant that they worked with to make sure that they were addressing all the governance issues. But their consultant didn't run the AGM particularly well, and the committee members didn't, so they invited me to. And the first AGM that I ran for them, I ran it in 45 minutes. And they looked at me at the end and went, oh my God, but this normally goes for an hour and a half, 2 hours. How did you do that? And we're talking a building of 350 apartments and, really, a high-end building. So there was high expectations. And there was a particular man who heckled every AGM, 100%. And he stood up and he did his usual heckle, and I listened to him and I said, right, well, I think that's something we need to delegate to the committee. So we wrote a delegation to the committee, and then he had another point, and another point, and another point. And each time I listened to him and I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then eventually he was satisfied and he sat down and we went on with the meeting. And at the end they said, I can't believe how you managed him. I said, but all he wanted was to be heard. Like, he didn't need solutions there and then, but in the past, people had argued with him and it had blown up into a fracas. Don't do that. People have a right to have an opinion. It's their home, so they can speak. And you delegate it to the committee. We don't need to make a decision right now. The committee can go off and investigate and come back to the next AGM or come back to the ownership group, whatever it is, whatever you delegate it to be. And all of a sudden, that man's not a problem anymore. he feels heard, he feels understood, and he feels like, he's had an impact on a problem in his life. So I agree with you, Jodi, 100%. People matter. We do need to follow protocol. We do need to follow the law. And we can't have meetings fall apart because people have a difference of opinion. People need to respectfully listen to each other and find solutions together. And that's what I'm all about. And I have been for, over 20 years. I'm really passionate about this, that I want to change this dichotomy of manager and lot owner. I really want us to be, have the common goal, harmony in the built environment.
Yeah, and
I think that's a vision of all of us on the call, actually. I think we all share that.
100%.
Yeah, so I do say this a lot, and like I've had a little bit of some comments, DMs, on some of my social content of why do I back strata managers sometimes? Why do I put out a post recently about the burnout rate in strata, and I got a lot of DMs kind of saying, I don't understand why you care about the strata managers. Like, why do you care that they're in a burnout epidemic? Like, you're an owner. And I'm like, because they're not my enemy. I'm like, they're human beings. Like, let's not forget this. These people have families. They're people's son and wife, and you know what I mean? Like, they're people. But also, at the end of the day, you can't, if you want things to be better from an owner experience perspective, you can't only look from one side of the fence, because the change needs to happen on both sides. So at the end of the day, supporting strata managers and getting them what they need to be able to provide me a better service gives me a better owner experience. So yes, I agree with Kate. You can't approach this from one side only. There needs to be more collaboration. There needs to be more understanding of both sides so that we can all move forward to a better experience. So yeah, I totally agree.
I like that. You can't really usually make change very effectively by standing on one side and pointing at the other and saying,
no,
you change first.
Yeah.
That rarely works. So.
I totally agree. So
any final comments, Thomas, to wrap us up? Anything that you took out pattern-wise?
We had an earlier comment that was talking about the report issues and funding, and that's a topic of its own, really. But it's interesting to hear that even between Australian states, they have this difference in approach to funding and who gets to make those decisions when. I think we're all in agreement that sort of tactical horizon is what needs doing in the next 5 years. Like, that's what's urgent and important, and you've got to find a way to fund those projects. But I do think that the crystal ball doesn't exist. Having some sense of when something is going to be up for renewal is helpful.
I feel like
so. I just wanted to kind of close that loop.
I would say that BC is probably behind New South Wales and Ontario, but a little bit ahead of Victoria in terms of education regulation. Not to say that any of the outcomes are really effectively that different ultimately, which is strange. So I feel like there's opportunities in all of these.
There was a comment earlier about education in Victoria. Where do we think that's going?
Well, they are bringing in a mandatory Cert 4. I'm not really a fan of that Cert 4. I think it's a bit too dry. I think it lacks the human perspective, Jodi, that you were talking to. I think it's very, and I also think that in the method it's delivered, people who come and do the courses that I offer find that, because I have a whiteboard and I go, come on, let's talk this through, let me explain this to you, how it really works, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's lacking in the education that they're looking at for Victoria. I would like the government to seriously contemplate committee education that they've not agreed to at this stage. That was a recommendation made by a committee that the government appointed to review our legislation. It was recommended that committee training be included. The government didn't embrace that. So we're going to continue to agitate to have that. I think education is a good thing, but I think, we all agree it's got to be the right education. It's got to be a lot broader. And I think it's got to
more
be
practical.
Yes. It's got to be in a way that people come away with that comprehension. I take that really seriously when I have a room full of people in front of me. If people don't walk away understanding what I'm presenting, it's on me. It's not on them, it's on me. It's my obligation to make sure that they understand. And if they don't understand that way, I'll try a different way, and then I'll try a different way, and I'll try a different way. And if they still don't get it, and everyone else in the room has, I'll work with them one-on-one. So, you know.
Or maybe they're just a lost
Kate,
cause.
how do they find you?
Pick them off the committee. That's it.
Someone who's needing this kind of help, Kate, how do they find you?
Find me? Stratasavvy.com.au. So,
Fantastic. And everyone should tune into what you're doing. Jodi, where do they find you?
Yeah, so follow us on best way, follow us on social. So Strata Stories Australia, whether that's on LinkedIn, if you're a Strata professional, you'd like to follow along, or across our Facebook or Instagram accounts.
Fantastic. Katharine, any final words?
No, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been so much fun. And yeah, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.